Hi everyone, and welcome to lesson 5 of the IGCSE skill acquisition and psychology lessons. This is lesson 5 of 6, so we're coming to the end of this topic. Today we're going to be looking at arousal and anxiety. We'll start with looking at some definitions and then start applying those definitions into how arousal and anxiety can affect performers in sport. So make the most of the note-taking function on the right-hand side as you have been in the previous lessons, and when you're ready, we'll make a start. So we're going to start with coming up with a definition for arousal, or start with exploring what arousal is and how we might describe it. Arousal is essentially a level of excitement and readiness to perform, and it's linked to both psychological and physiological factors. So arousal is how excited and ready you are to be involved in physical activity, and also what effects it has on your brain or your mind, and also what effects it has on your body. So a textbook definition is an increased level of mental excitement and alertness, the state of being excited, keen, and mentally and physically ready to perform a task. So quite a mouthful, quite a lot there just to define what arousal is. But if we break it down into these key areas, it's the levels of excitement and readiness to perform, and it's linked to both psychological and physiological factors. So things happen to your mind, your brain, and things also happen to your body. So your thought processes and physical changes. How excited you are, how excited, keen, and both mentally and physically ready you are to perform the task you're about to do. So with this, there is an important theory that you have to be able to describe and understand, and it is a theory created by Yerkes and Dodson, and it's called the inverted U theory. Now this links to how arousal can impact the level of performance. So if we go through this step by step, you might want to get something to draw this graph down, or this theory down with some notes, because it's an important one and you're regularly asked a question about the theory, either to label different parts or to draw the complete diagram of the theory, or you're asked about how arousal can affect performance, and using this theory will help you understand that process. So first of all, as arousal increases, so does the performance quality. So if you look at the y-axis here, we have the quality of performance. So from the bottom is quite poor quality of performance, all the way up to a high quality of performance up the y-axis. And as we go along the x-axis, we have arousal. So this is to do with our levels of arousal. So as you can see, as our arousal increases, so does the quality of performance, until we reach the optimum point of performance. So this is known as moderate levels of arousal, and this is our optimum level of performance, okay, around here. So we've started to increase the quality of performance as our arousal levels increased, and we've got to almost a plateau of our performance level, and this is known as our moderate levels or optimum levels of arousal. But beyond the optimum arousal levels, all increases in arousal from here will lead to a decrease in performance. So once we've reached our optimum level of performance, if we continue to increase our arousal, our performance will decrease. And as you can see, if you look at the shape of the diagram, or the shape of the graph, we have an inverted U, or an upside down U shape, where the performance increases, it plateaus, and then it decreases, and that's all to do with the increase in arousal. So this starting point here, where we are looking at the quality of performance increasing up to our optimum arousal, can be noted or described as boredom. So here we're not aroused enough, we're not excited or keen enough or ready to perform to the best of our ability, so we're in the boredom phase. But as we reach this phase here, where we have moderate levels of arousal and we're performing to our optimum, this is the area we want to be in. But as our arousal levels continue to increase, our performance starts to decrease, and this is known as the panic phase. So this is where we're continuing to be aroused, however the extra arousal can lead to aggression or wrong decisions, and this can lead to a decrease in our performance. So this is boredom, normally down here, and this is panic, normally around here. This is the optimum level because we have a high quality performance and we have optimum levels of arousal because we're interested and engaged in the activity. So this is the inverted U theory. You might want to take some time just to write some notes down on this in the notes section on the right hand side, and perhaps draw your own version of this graph. Now my graph itself is a little bit disjointed because I wanted to separate the parts, but you'll normally see this as just a U shape, a continuous upside down U shape, where it starts low, reaches the optimum and carries on down to the other side, creating a U. So this is important to understand, that as we increase our arousal, we start off with low performance, so the performance continues to get better, but then if the arousal keeps going, our performance becomes worse. So in the previous model we looked at the arousal, and we looked at optimum arousal being somewhere roughly in the middle of the inverted U theory on the graph. However, it's quite important to understand that the optimum arousal level for a performer can change depending on two different things. So the phase of learning, we've covered phases of learning previously, the cognitive, associative and autonomous phase. So beginners find it more difficult to cope with arousal. A question I've put there is, consider how nervous a performer will be depending on how skilled and experienced they are. So as you can see from this graph here, we have performance on the same axis and arousal on the same axis, but if you look at the cognitive line, which is the purple line, we have a lower level of performance in general. However, their optimum arousal is still quite low because we want them to be we don't want them to be overexcited or nervous or potentially too anxious to perform. So the optimum level of arousal is still quite low. And as we move towards the elite performer, you can see that their general level of performance is higher, and their arousal, their optimum arousal level is higher as well. So elite performers have the ability or have the potential to become more aroused, more excited, more engaged in the performance to reach their optimum arousal levels. And it also depends on the nature of the skill. So here we've got two examples of fine and complex skills compared to gross and simple skills. So gross skill benefit from high levels of arousal than fine skills because fine skills we know require lots of concentration and are very precise. So if we're comparing here a shot putter to someone who's performing in archery, you'll see lots of shot putters before they're about to throw the shot really building themselves up, shouting to the crowd, slapping their muscles, activating their body and becoming really aggressive so they can exert as much force as possible. You wouldn't necessarily see someone who's doing archery doing that before they're about to shoot towards their target. And they're more likely to be looking at controlling their breathing and lowering their heart rate and becoming as chilled as they possibly can before performing. So their arousal levels are going to be different as well. Their optimal arousal levels are going to be different as well. And then we also have some varies within sports, so depending on their roles. We have, for example, the forwards in rugby compared to the backs in rugby. So forwards are going to be using lots of lots of gross skills, lots of skills that require lots of strength and force in the scrum, for example, where they're using their whole body with maximum force to be successful. But then sometimes we might take the fly half, taking a conversion, for example, which is an opportunity where they want to be a little bit more controlled and relaxed and less excited, anxious or nervous. So different scenarios and different positions in different sports also have different levels of optimum arousal. And it's important that to perform the best at the highest level and at the lowest level, you need to try and stay in your optimum levels of arousal for as long as possible, because we know before that they'll be bored and not engaged in the sport and not performing very well. Or beyond optimal levels, they start to become aggressive, slightly over anxious, start to rush decision making and start to make errors. So the shape is the same. We still have the boredom section, or the section where they're under aroused, and we still have a plateau, and we still have the section where they're over aroused. However, the optimal level of arousal, so the very top of the U, can move along the arousal axis depending on where they are in their phase of learning, what type of skill they're performing, or their position or scenario within a game. Okay, so moving on, we're going to look at the next key term, which is anxiety. So by definition, anxiety is a negative reaction from a performer to stress, causing the performer to feel worried, nervous or apprehensive. So this is generally something that a performer will feel when they're either under aroused or over aroused. So there are two parts of anxiety that must be identified and understood. So there are two different types of anxiety that you need to be able to explain. The first one is being cognitive. So using your previous knowledge from what we've covered so far and the word cognitive, you might be able to have an idea of what this might concern. So this is the mental symptoms that a performer feels, such as stress, fear, worry and doubt. And these can occur if a performer is in a state of under or over arousal. So these are the things that you feel within, and the mental symptoms that affect your performance. So when you're feeling stressed before a game or nervous and you've got the butterflies in your tummy and you're starting to worry about the potential outcome, whether you're going to win, how good your opponent's going to be, and then you may start to even doubt your own ability. And these can all happen when you are under or over aroused. And the second one is somatic anxiety. So when we think of the terminology or the word somatic, this is to do with the body, anything to do with the body. So here we have the physical manifestation of anxiety. So this is the physical changes that happen to the body when you are in the state of anxiety, such as sweating, tight chest, butterflies in the stomach is a somatic type of anxiety. You feel it. Your heart rate starts to increase. You start to get clammy hands. I'm sure we've all been nervous and anxious before and felt some of these physical changes in the body. So when you are either under or over aroused, these mental symptoms start to appear in your mind, and you start to focus on them, and then the brain sends signals to the body, and the body's response to these changes are the somatic symptoms that we've got at the bottom. So sweating, tight chest, and increase in heart rate. So these are all things that happen, two parts of anxiety that happen when you're under or over aroused and you're feeling anxious before performance. So top performers and all the way down to cognitive learners can use relaxation techniques to try and control their levels of arousal and anxiety, particularly if you're over aroused and you're struggling with anxiety. These relaxation techniques that we're going to look at are very helpful in controlling them. And if you can control arousal and anxiety, you're more likely to maintain optimum levels of arousal in performance. So some of the relaxation techniques that we can use are deep breathing, mental rehearsal, and visualization. So deep breathing is a learned way of breathing in a deep, calm and focused way to promote relaxation as well as physical well-being. Simple things, there are hundreds of different types of deep breathing techniques that you can use, but all this does is it places a focus on breathing, and what that will do in turn is bring down the heart rate and try and focus the performer, and control the somatic symptoms of anxiety, and also try and bring them down to, to stop worrying about the performance itself and start to control the two types of anxiety. Whereas mental rehearsal is running through the skill, sequence or event in your mind in detail using all your senses. So this is trying to mentally put yourself in the position of performing the skill before you perform the skill. Including the movements itself, being very precise with the detail, trying to think of specific elements and really focusing on what it is you're trying to achieve. And then the last one, which is visualization, which is quite similar to mental rehearsal in a way, but it's seeing the best positive outcome for the skill or technique you're about to perform. So visualizing in your mind you performing that skill or technique perfectly with a positive outcome, and repeating that visualization over and over again, repeating scenarios in the game that might perhaps happen and how you would deal with that scenario, and really visualizing loads of different aspects of the game or performance that you're about to do, with a positive outcome to try and get you ready and excited and keen to perform to the best of your ability. So that is arousal, anxiety and relaxation techniques. So you need to be able to describe what arousal and anxiety are. Maybe in the text box on the right hand side you write your own definitions of arousal and anxiety. You can always go back through the video if you're struggling to find out or struggling to come up with a definition. And then you need to understand the inverted U theory. So as there's an increase in arousal, performance is increased until we reach our optimum level of arousal. And if arousal continues to increase, then our performance starts to decrease after that. And it looks like the shape of an upside down U on the graph. We looked at different levels of optimal arousal depending on their stage of learning, the skill they're performing, and maybe positions or scenarios within a game and how that changes. So the 3 relaxation techniques, just quickly, deep breathing, mental rehearsal and visualization. It's good to have a definition of these and maybe some examples of what they look like. Maybe you want to go away and research them. So that was lesson 5 of the psychology part of this area that we're covering. We have one more lesson left where we're going to be looking at personality types, and then we will go through everything we've covered in skill acquisition and psychology using the criteria as a checklist, and then that will be section 3 of the IGCSE content complete. Please make sure you're using the notes section, because any notes that you put in there you will be able to download at the end. So thanks for joining me again for lesson 5, and I look forward to seeing you next time in our final lesson. So speak to you soon.